Well, hello everyone. I am waiting for others to join our group. I'm recording this. Hopefully that recording will work well. I'll be posting it on my YouTube channel, and I have some of you who have asked for a link to the video, and I'll make sure you get that. Again, hoping everything works out perfectly here. I'm tracking myself on another computer just to see if I can make sure I understand what you all are seeing. But as you join our discussion today, down below there's a little area called chat, and you can feel free to click on that and make your comments. I do have the everybody unmuted, so if you have anything that you want to say, please feel free to say it. If there's some background noise, I might wind up muting everyone's voice. Today we're talking about the art of getting others to listen. And I'm just checking to see if anybody emails me if they're having a hard time getting in. If you're like me, you've experienced some difficulty with others hearing you if you're over the age of 10 or even before that. I'm your host, John Mason, and just let me tell you a little bit of background about myself. For 32 years, I was a psychotherapist, and guess what the #1 tool for a psychotherapist is in their work? And yes, it's listening. For 15 years, I've been a life coach, and guess what the #1 tool for a life coach is? Yes, it's listening. And it took me a while to figure out that listening is not just listening. And I'll tell you a little more about that in a little bit. But so I would listen to people, and every now and then, as a counselor, I would give advice. And guess what? 80 to 90% of the time, people didn't take my advice, and later on I would find out they never heard me in the first place. So it was a struggle. I had to take classes, I had to go to workshops, read books, but what I really found out was that the ability to get somebody else to listen was an art. It wasn't something that you just did. You just said something and automatically they got that. If you've ever been to college or even in high school, you'll know that it's difficult as a teacher, it's difficult to get a student to listen, but as a student, the teacher can tell me everything I need to know, but I don't always hear it. I got pretty good in college at taking some detailed notes, but it wasn't always a guarantee that I actually heard what I needed to hear. The longer I was in school, the better I got at it, but it taught me something about how I needed to be as a speaker. Why do you believe that it's so hard to get others to listen? If you are not on this call and you are able to email me, I would like to know what you think, what your particular, what your theory is. There's a lot of different theories about this. I've boiled it down to some really basic ideas. And I'd also like to know who are you having a hard time getting to listen? In the work that I've done as a counselor, the #1 people group that I was working with who were having a hard time were husbands and wives. Typically, communication is a problem. The 3 areas in marriage that are a problem are communication, problem solving, and managing emotions. So communication is difficult, but what's the #1 skill in communication that's usually missing? Well, it's listening. Women usually say their husbands don't listen to them. It's also a problem when we have children, not just the young children, but teenagers. Teens have a hard time getting their parents to listen. Employers have a hard time getting their employees to listen. Employees have a hard time getting their employers to listen. Maybe it's a friend or a family member that you're having a hard time. This is very important that you identify, if you want to be successful in this process, identify who that person is. What's their name? Are they male or female? How old are they? We're going to get into more of that. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story. Even though I grew up being very attentive, doing well in school, in my first year of marriage, I was in college. My wife and I were living in one of the dorms, staying in one of the dorms. And I'm not joking. One evening, she grabbed me by the earlobe and dragged me to the door. She says, "Let's go. We're going to a communication class." I was shocked. I thought, "Oh my gosh, what are you talking about here?" Um, she said, "You need to learn how to listen." I thought, in my mind, I was the best listener that I'd ever known. She took me to the class, and this was 6 sessions taught by 2 counselors who were very good at what they did. And I sat in the back of the class and I glared at the instructors. And I didn't want to be there. I already knew how to listen. But by the third session, this was a 6 session class, by the third session, I was amazed. I was in awe of what I didn't know and what I was learning. I realized I wasn't listening to what my wife said. I was hearing what I wanted to hear. And obviously she did not feel listened to. I made it my goal to apply what I learned in that class. And within the next 6 months to a year, I actually was starting to do pretty well. According to my wife, I was starting to do pretty well. Now, I was so impressed with that class, getting somebody like me who was very resistant to actually pay attention. I signed up to become an instructor, and I taught that class for many decades to many, probably thousands of couples. So from that class and from lots of experience, I've learned more and more about how to not only be a great listener, but how to get others to listen. When you look at the information out there on communicating with other people, you're going to find a lot of different books. The 2 books that have stood out to me that I want to bring to your attention here are The Language of Love by Gary Smalley and John Trent, which actually its first edition came out in the late 90s, and I remember reading it. I thought it was a pretty good book. And then there's The 5 Love Languages, which a lot of people have heard about. There's nothing wrong with these books. I want to make that absolutely clear. If you read those books in addition to what I'm teaching right now, I think you're going to find that they're very helpful. My personal experience is if you go out and read those books and then believe that they're going to go out and help you get somebody to listen that's not been listening to you, probably not going to work. John Trent and Gary Smalley's book probably would help a little more than The 5 Love Languages, because they teach you how to create stories or word pictures, which is a really good technique. Well, how is this class different? How does it stand out from that? Well, I'm going to be teaching you more about a process that has some very specific principles and skills that I haven't seen addressed in books. Now, it was addressed in the class that I took. The class that I took was called Couple Communication. It's the class I became an instructor in, and the details of how to get others to listen or increase the likelihood of being listened to are very well covered in there, and that's a process. So this course is going to be very similar to that, or this master class. You want to start by being very clear about your goal. This masterclass is the art of getting others to listen. Your number one goal is for them to listen to you, understand your message, and acknowledge that they know what you're trying to say to them. If your goal is to try to make them do something they don't want to do, that goal doesn't fit with this course or this class. That's a subject for a different class. Your goal is to enter into a process where the person you want to hear you actually hears your message and acknowledges what you are saying. It doesn't mean they agree with you. It doesn't mean they're going to automatically do what you want. If you start getting into trying to get people to do what you want, you're now controlling them. That becomes manipulation, and manipulation is only going to push people away. Now, if you can start by getting them to acknowledge you in a healthy way, the likelihood of more of a cooperative venture where there's a more favorable outcome has a much better chance of coming into play. And today, in this process, we're going to use an analogy of a garden. This analogy, in my opinion, fits perfectly in order to describe not only the problem of getting other people to listen, but the solution. So think about a garden with a gate. Their mind is the garden, but between their mind and you is a gate. And that gate, by default, is in a closed position. Our goal is going to be to open the gate. In their mind is, their garden is some soil. Now think about the parable of the sower from the parable that Jesus taught in the scriptures. He talked about a sower went out to sow, and the sower threw seed out. Some of it landed on hard ground, some of it landed on rocky soil, some of it landed on fertile soil. The seed that landed on hard soil died when the sun came up. The seed that landed on rocky soil began to grow a little bit, but when the cares of the world came in, the seed died. And in the fertile soil, the seed took root and grew and brought forth much fruit. Now, when we're going to be talking about how the message you want to get to people to receive is a seed. And we're going to want a process where we have the best chance of getting our seed into fertile soil. Most people, when they put their seed out there to another person, are throwing it up against the gate. It lands on the asphalt and it withers and dies. And of course, you get frustrated with the listener because they're not hearing you. The gate is the way. If you don't go through the gate, you don't get your seed in. Now, in the parable of Jesus, the seed is the word of God. In the work that we're doing here, the seed is the message that you want the other person to hear. And the goal is to get that gate to open up. And if you don't follow certain principles and steps, that gate will not move. It's not going anywhere. Why is the gate important? Well, it's in the way. Most people's gate, like I said earlier, is closed by default. It stays closed. And even if we follow these steps and get it opened, as soon as your seed goes in, the gate will slam shut very quickly. That's normal. Everybody's mind does that. And there's reasons why. But we don't want to work against how the mind works. We want to work with how the mind works. And a good analogy to describe this problem is the screwdriver problem. Let's suppose that you have a Phillips head screw, and the Phillips head screw has a little cross in it, but you go get a standard flathead screwdriver and you try to screw in that screw. Now, most of the time it won't work. Sometimes if you get exactly the right flathead screwdriver, it might work. But let's say you're trying really hard to get this screw to go in and it's not working, it's not going anywhere. I've had hundreds, if not thousands, of couples tell me, I have tried and tried to get him to hear me. I tried and tried to get her to hear me. I really have tried. They don't think I believe them. Well, of course I believe them. I believe them 100% that they are trying really hard to get this done. But they have the wrong tool for the job. They're using a process of force and trying to make people hear them, and they're trying to grind it in, and they're using ways of speaking that just don't work. It doesn't get through. But what if you go get a Phillips head screwdriver? In the word, in the Greek, the meaning of the word perfect just actually means a tool fit for the job. So you go get the Phillips head screwdriver, you put it in there, and the zipper goes right in. If you use the right principles and skills, it's not that hard. But you need to be patient with this process because it's a learning curve. It takes some practice, and the more you practice, the better you're going to get at it. How to open the gate. Okay, now we're going to talk here about, I'm going to give you the secret. The secret to opening this gate is listening. If we give our listener what they need, the number one need that most people have, and I believe it's one of the number one needs that women have, is to be accurately understood and listened to and understood to their satisfaction, so that they know you understand what they mean. They do not have the need to be agreed with. It's just to be understood. And when we meet that need, when we listen to our listener very, very carefully, we put them first, the gate very slowly starts to open up. Their garden, it might have fertile soil, it might have rocky soil, But I believe in every person's garden, somewhere on the other side of the gate, there is some area where there's fertile soil. Our goal is to find that soil. We want only good soil to get our seed in. If we don't have the good soil, we're in trouble. It's just not going to work. Our seed is our message. So we are going to put extremely good quality into our seed. And I'm going to tell you a little more about that in a bit. You are the sower. So you're going to have to take responsibility for whether you're casting your seed on hard ground or into rocky soil, or if it's going into fertile soil. You're going to have to take responsibility to be not only about which soil are you putting it into, but how to till their soil, how to get their soil ready. So now we're going to talk about the process. I'm going a little more quickly because no one's asking any questions. But if you do have other questions, please feel free to email me. The process involves about 6 steps. The first step is to prepare your seed. The goal is to make sure that you're extremely clear about your message. What is the message that you want your listener to get? Is it clear? And is it in only one sentence? I'll tell you from, again, many, many years of experience, if your message takes more than one sentence, they probably won't get it. It probably won't happen. And if it takes more than one sentence, you might have more than one message. You want to just stick with one at a time. If you have 4 or 5 things you want to say, that's fine. Just start with one. Start with the most important one. Condense it into one sentence. And what I've told people for years is, when you get that sentence together, run it by somebody else. You can run it by me. You can run it by somebody else. And if that other person looks at that sentence and says, huh, they don't get it, well, I'll guarantee you, your targeted listener is not going to get it either. It's got to be very, very clear. And that's the number one reason, not only because, this might be the second reason, if you're not listening to them, they probably won't listen to you. And if your message is not clear, that's the number 2 reason they didn't get it, because it didn't make any sense. I once had a counselor I was supervising. This is many, many years ago, and she was not good at listening. She had this problem she was talking about. I listened to her very carefully, and I sowed the seed. I gave her this message that I thought she needed to hear. It appeared she didn't hear it at all. 2 weeks later, she came in, and she had this epiphany. She woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning with this amazing insight. And she told me what the insight was. Well, it was exactly word for word everything I'd said 2 weeks before. I said, well, I thought I remember saying that 2 weeks before. And she says, I don't remember you saying anything about it. This just came to me at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's the way a lot of times the seed germinates. So sometimes you need to take yourself out of the way and make sure that it's more important to get the message through than to be acknowledged for being the person who gave the message. You want to put really good quality, write down your message, what you want them to understand once they get it. And I also recommend that you phrase it in terms of what you're for rather than what you're against. Stay away from putting a lot of nots or don'ts in your sentence. Just what is the core message that you want them to get? Prepare yourself. By preparing yourself, I mean get to know your listener. You got to prepare your knowledge of your listener. What is important to them? Who are they? Who are they really? Yeah, there might be your child, or they might be your spouse. We learn a little more about their personality. Have they taken some personality tests? What do you know about their past? What do you really, really know about them? What have you seen and heard? What have you observed them as far as how they respond to other people? What do they like? What's of interest to them? What stories do they like? What movies do they like? That could play a huge key in maybe getting through to them. Also, be extremely patient, because sometimes there are some listeners where we have to enter into a campaign. We're not going to get them to hear us just today. We might need to be doing a little bit of listening and a little bit of sewing over the course of several days, maybe even weeks. Some people are pretty blocked and they can't get that very quickly. Be informed. Be informed not only about your listener, be informed about the process, skills, and pay attention to what's working and what's not working. Don't just throw things at them and hope it gets through. Prepare the soil. One of the keys here to prepare their soil is if we make this about them. I think Benjamin Disraeli said, if you want a man to listen to you, talk about, let's see, he says, if you talk to a man about himself, they'll listen to you for hours. That's very true. The number one favorite subject of most people is me. They want to talk about themselves. So if they can see that your message has something to do with them and how it can help them, they're going to be a lot more open. Connect to something deeply important to them. So what might that be? What's important to them? Keep a little notebook. Sometimes you have to observe them for a little bit. Most people, especially men, are not very good observers. I've asked men for years, what is your wife's favorite color? And out of 100 men, maybe 3 get it accurate. Number one guess most people have is blue. And only had one woman in 32 years whose favorite color was blue. So be careful to know accurate information about them and make it about them. Now, right now, in this slide, we're getting into the guts, the nuts and the bolts of this process. To open the gate, you need to listen. And listening is a skill. So we want to practice active listening. If they say something, we say back to them what we heard them say. Now, we don't need to use exactly the same words, but we want to get the essence of what they mean. If they say, gee, I'm sorry I'm late, I overslept, there was 6 inches of snow on the ground, my tire was flat, it took me a while to fix the flat, traffic was busy, you might say something like, sounds like you've had a stressful day. Yeah, they say yeah. So the process of active listening, again, is a skill. You want to acknowledge them, say back to them what you heard them say, and make sure you got it right. If you didn't get it right, they're going to start to shut down. Use their language. Now, of course, I just talked about 2 books who use the language of love, but their language means their words. What do they mean by certain words? If they're from the South, you might use some Southern expressions. If they're from the West, some Western expressions. But you want to use words that make sense to them. Women will have one way of explaining things, men might have something else. Use stories that are relatable to that person. What are they interested in? Again, movies, hobbies like golf, tennis, hiking, camping. You can use analogies from those to kind of tie in your theme. Use timing. Well, now timing means, I call it a window, Now, teachers call it the teachable moment. They can be teaching kids something over and over and over, and all of a sudden a kid gets it, and he might have heard it over and over for 3 years, and he just lights up. Well, there was a moment where their window opened and the information came in and it worked. For example, when I talk about timing, I'm talking about, we can talk about energy. Now, if a person has a really busy week, they got a stressful job, and they got a lot going on during the week and during their workday, it's probably one of the worst times to try to talk to them. When they get home and they are hungry and they're tired, probably not a good time. What about Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon or Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon? If they're going to have a day off, or, there's certain days that are better for them than others. Find a time when they're less stressed, less cluttered, and they tend to be more tuned in. And again, if you're making it about them and you're listening to them, they're going to be far more likely to be open. What do you think the attention span of the average human being is? In other words, how much time do you have to give your message? Well, according to research that goes back many decades, the attention span of the average human being is only 20 seconds. I still hear sermons that go on for over an hour. Well, I can tell you pretty well, 80% of the people in the congregation, you lost them a long time ago. Uh, Continuity is an illusion that the mind creates. We're always coming in and out. That's why when you watch a video like this, it's a lot easier for you because you can go back and review what you might have missed. I'm always taking notes, and when I go back, I still look down. I don't remember writing that, or I just, if I re-listen to a recording, I get something I didn't get before. The attention span is 20 seconds is not a very long time, but that's about how long you have. And sometimes you can tell if they're tuned in more, your eyes are going to be looking at you, they're going to be facing you. If they're looking away or if they seem overwhelmed, they're probably not hearing you. Use cadence. Now, cadence means it's kind of like the old preachers used to use, where they would build up really strong. There's a pause, and they would say, and you need to learn to listen. They emphasize their point. And cadence, sometimes you just don't want to use a monotone. You don't want to go. Now, I've had a lot of teachers, and I've actually heard preachers who have this monotone, and they never can go up or down in the monotone. Wow, within 5 minutes, it's a really good sleeping pill. You want to make your tone of voice interesting, which leads me to beware of your nonverbals. 15% of your communication is verbal. It's the message that you have to speak. 85% is nonverbal. Tone of voice, body language, facial expressions. If you come into my office and I say, hi, would you like to sit in that chair there? You say, great. 2 weeks later, you come in and I say, hi, you want to sit in that chair? I've used exactly the same words with a different tone of voice expression. Take a moment and ask yourself, what do you think you might think I meant when I said it the second way? Well, a lot of people would say, oh, was there something wrong with that chair? I say, what? I don't know what you're talking about. Well, you sounded like there's something wrong. I didn't say that. I used exactly the same words. Be aware of your nonverbals. Is your message matching up with your verbals? Are your verbals matching up, your nonverbals matching up with your message? I can guarantee you, you might not notice an incongruence there, but they will. They're going to be able to tell if you're angry, if you're happy, if you're authentic, if you're lying. People can tell. They might not say anything, but they can tell. So you're really going to want to make sure you're very clear in your message and your nonverbals match up. Use silence. This is one of the hardest things for counselors to learn to do. When somebody's talking and you're listening to them, you say it back to them what you heard them say. But if it looks like they're starting to process something or think, don't say anything. Give them some time to process. When they're ready to talk, they will. And a lot of times when they're done processing, they're the most ready to hear a message. So let there be some silence. Don't try to machine gun your message. One of the things I've noticed, especially in husbands and wives, one of the number one needs of a wife is to be actually heard and understood to her satisfaction. And sometimes when a man finally learns that skill, and the first time in 30 years, he finally gives her an accurate listening response, she now wants to fire hose him with everything she's been wanting to say for the last 30 years. And after the first 30-second burst, she lost him because he can't hear anything after that. So you really want to keep it small doses. Also, trust the process. This is a process. Trust that if you do this in a reliable and skilled way, they probably will get it. And use the process where if you find out they didn't get it, don't get frustrated and give up. Just realize, okay, I just learned what didn't work. Go back and reevaluate. Let me tell you a little bit about Cindy. This is probably 20 years ago, and a mother brought her daughter Cindy, who was 4 years old. I was in a pretty big office at the time, and this kind of dates me, but I had a TV on the other side, and it had little buttons on it to change the channel. And Cindy's mother was completely convinced that Cindy was completely psychotic. She was totally insane, and she was worried sick about her daughter. And I said, well, what makes you think something's wrong with your daughter? And she said, I keep trying to talk to her, but she doesn't hear me. I said, have you had her hearing checked? Yes, she's had her hearing checked. And the doctor said her hearing was perfect, nothing wrong with her. Well, what I noticed was Cindy walked over to the TV set and mother screamed as loud as she could, Cindy, get away from that TV set, and started threatening her. Cindy literally walked over to the TV set as if no one else was in the room. Absolutely no one. She started playing with the TV set. Mother kept screaming at her, and Cindy was oblivious. And mother looked at me and said, see what I mean? She's totally psychotic. I said, are you willing to do a little experiment? And she says, well, anything. I'm so frustrated. I said, when I point to you like this, I would like you to just whisper Cindy's name. She says, okay, okay. She said, how's that going to help? I said, just trust me and see what happens. She said, okay. So I waited just a little bit. Cindy was playing with TV, and I said, now. And she said, Cindy. And Cindy turned around and looked at her. And the mother said, oh my gosh, it's a miracle. Well, not really. Cindy, somewhere along the line, had tuned out any decibels above a whisper, and mother didn't exist above that decibel. When mother used a range or a volume that she'd never used before, Cindy tuned in. Cindy was not psychotic. She wasn't stupid either. She was tuning people out. So sometimes we have to lower our volume and back off a little bit in order to kind of get the other person's attention. So then when you've practiced these skills, you've listened, their gate starts to open up. And how do you know when their gate is open? Well, if I've done a good job listening and understanding them to their satisfaction, I've used some silence, and I've been careful to make it about them. When their gate opens enough, one of the things I see the listener doing is they'll look at me and say, so what do you think? It's almost a compulsion. They just have to know what I think. That tells me, bam, they're ready. I now have my seed prepared. I have this narrow window of just seconds, and I have launched my seed. I say my one sentence, no more than that. The gate closes. The seed is planted. I have my best chance of it germinating. Now I need to give it time. Just like with this counselor many years ago, it took her 2 weeks. And when she finally got it, she thought it was her idea. Wow. That's the most powerful germination right there, is if they think it was their idea, they got it. They bought everything. And if they think it's my idea and they kind of are grudgingly accepting it, it won't germinate very well. After you planted it and that door closes, anything you say after that needs to just support that seed. Don't try to start adding more ideas, just that seed. Now, do not add any more seeds or any new ideas until this one generates. Again, it could take an hour, a day, a week. When that germinates, then you can start working on your next idea. Be patient. This is a campaign. Now, the final step is ponder the results. We planted our seed. It either has or hasn't germinated. After a short time, 2 or 3 days, maybe a week, evaluate the outcome. How did it go? Did it germinate? Did they take the idea? If it did germinate, or it looks like it is germinating, rejoice and nurture that new idea. Support it. Otherwise, we might need to go in and repair our seed. We might need to fine-tune our message. We might need to find a way to connect it to that individual. We might need to reevaluate our process. Were we using our timing right? Did we try to sow the seed when the gate was closed or wasn't fully open? What could we do differently? Don't get discouraged, just reevaluate and then start over and go right back through the process. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. My name is John Mason. This has been The Art of Getting Others to Listen. I will work on getting this audio loaded onto YouTube, and I'll send it out to those who registered for the class. I am thanking you for taking time for this masterclass. This particular subject is very passionate to me. I know it can make the absolute difference sometimes between a bad marriage and a good marriage and a great marriage. It can make the difference between good or a great experience, bad or great experience with your teenagers, employees, customers. It can make a huge difference. You can contact me at john@johnmasoncoach.com. And many of you have the reply email. Feel free to contact me at any time with questions. I will be doing more classes on different subjects, such as the truth about trust, how to automate your business and turn it into passive income. Quite a list. Thank you, and I hope your day goes exceptionally well and exceptionally blessed.